Let's return to the elections for you, should we? We can go to Westminster, talk to Labour's election coordinator, Douglas Alexander MP. Good morning to you. A bit of a disappointing night, it would seem, for Labour. Would you agree?
Well, listen, UKIP will certainly command some of the headlines this morning, but beneath those headlines, another story is emerging, which is in those key battleground seats that we know will decide the outcome of the general election in now under a year. Labour's made real progress, whether that's in Cambridge, whether that is in Stevenage, whether that's in Swindon, a whole range of seats. We are moving forward and making progress. And in that sense, if I was an incumbent Conservative MP waking up this morning, I'd be a lot more nervous than if I was a Labour challenger.
Are you not nervous in that, I mean, you've been named in some of the papers this morning as coming under direct personal fire in this election campaign for just simply underestimating the impact UKIP would have on your support?
Well, listen, that kind of criticism goes with the territory when you accept a job like this, but I can assure you that in terms of how we defeat UKIP, we were clear from the outset that while it's important what you say in a Sky studio or what you say in a radio interview, actually the way to defeat UKIP is conversation by conversation, doorstep by doorstep, street by street, community by community. We knocked on more than 7 million doors in the course of this campaign. We had more activists on the street yesterday, not just than UKIP, but than UKIP, the Conservatives and the Liberals combined. And when I accepted this job, I was determined that we should strengthen and accelerate that ground operation. I think in an era where there's such distrust towards politicians, making sure that we have activists rooted in communities across the United Kingdom, taking that conversation to the voters, is what's ultimately going to make the difference in the general election. And I've only been strengthened in that conviction by what we've witnessed overnight.
And yet, you might have lots of people out on the streets, all credit to them, but what it hasn't done is stopped people in some of those wards yesterday thinking, well, I'm not going to vote Labour today, I'm going to vote for UKIP.
Well, of course, I think there are many people who feel that somehow they've been ignored by politics and let down by the economy. Our task in the coming year is to win their support ahead of a general election. But I'm not for a moment denying the fact that UKIP was able to scoop up quite a lot of that alienation and that anger. And the challenge for Labour is to offer not just anger but answers in the course of the coming year. Whether that's at our National Policy Forum in July or our party conference, we'll be setting out those practical answers.
Well, we need some answers in all of this, don't we? Because I mean, it has been claimed, and it's got to be a fair point, surely, from all of the three main political parties, that actually, and Labour in particular with this, that you haven't had a clear strategy for dealing with UKIP.
Well, I think in terms of UKIP, the strategy is to start where the conversation needs to take place, which is from Labour members to activists to supporters and then directly to the public. I think the idea that you can match this new phenomenon in politics just by the old politics, by shouting louder, putting up another poster or saying something different in an interview, ultimately doesn't understand the driving force behind UKIP support. There is a deep antipathy towards how politics has been done in the past, and there's deep concern in terms of how the economy is developing. So we need to offer policy answers, but we also need to break through that wall of cynicism. And I believe that the people best placed to do that are the army of activists that we will be deploying in the course of the last 12 months. They've done extraordinary work overnight last night, but I believe there's even more work that we can do together in the months ahead.
Isn't the electorate telling you, I mean, whether, you know, through the results or face-to-face on the doorsteps, that actually what you need to do is come up with clear strategies on immigration, clear strategies on our European position?
Well, actually, my judgment from talking to many voters on the doorstep, not just over the last few days, but over many months, is that the fuel in the tank of UKIP, if you like, is not so much an anti-European sentiment, although there's some of that, but an anti-politics sentiment. In that sense, they were able to convince people last night, in larger numbers than they had before, that they stood outside of politics as usual. And that poses a challenge not just to the Conservative Party and the Liberal Party, who are being wiped out in whole regions of the country by UKIP, but also to the Labour Party as well. And I think the way that we address that challenge is to intensify our efforts to be seen to work directly with communities across the country, and at the same time to set out policies in the course of the coming months that answer the kind of anxieties and concerns that people have expressed in the course of last night.
How do you win people back? And let's be frank about this, when you have a party leader, the man who wants to be Prime Minister of this country, who, according to a leading Labour figure quoted in the Times this morning, looks weird, sounds weird, is weird?
Well, listen, I mean, let's leave the unnamed sources to try and identify themselves. What's interesting and significant here, surely, is that what we witnessed last night is not actually the consequence of recent days. The support for UKIP has been building over many years, and actually the forces that are contributing to UKIP support have been developing for decades. And actually, I do think that it's just not adequate to try and attribute what's happened overnight to recent days or to recent weeks. You've got to understand this in a broader context, and that's a deep challenge, not just for the Conservatives and the Liberals, but I accept it's a challenge for the Labour Party as well. I do think we've got to take that conversation directly to the doorsteps. We will win back that support by talking as members and as activists directly to those voters on the doorstep, on the streets, in the communities, rather than simply, with the greatest of respect, in a Sky studio or anywhere else.
Well, yeah, but let's be frank about Ed Miliband in all of this. I mean, you say unnamed source, a leading Labour figure making that particularly pointed remark. What about Mr Stringer, a colleague of yours who has talked about the lacklustre campaign that Ed Miliband has led in all of this? It would seem, whether you like it or not, that there is some dissent amongst the front bench, amongst your colleagues at Westminster, about what Ed Miliband is doing.
Well, listen, Graham can speak for himself, as he's done on so many occasions in the past under different Labour leaders, but I don't think there's anything lacklustre about knocking on 7 million doors during this campaign. I don't think there's anything lacklustre. Indeed, I think it's an insult to those activists when you recognise we had more activists on the streets yesterday.
But it's not about the people on the streets, it's about the results in the ballot box, isn't it?
Well, if you look at the results in the ballot box, the point I'm making to you again is, of course, UKIP have made gains. Of course, they're going to be in the headlines today. But if you look at the kind of seats that are going to determine the outcome of the general election, if you look at seats like Stevenage, you look at seats like Cambridge, you look at seats like Peterborough, you look at seats like Lincoln, Labour are making significant progress. And it's on that basis, I believe, this morning, as I did yesterday, that Labour can win the 2015 general election.